"Stop banging on the damn wall, Emil. You're gonna bring the whole thing down," roared Mrs. Crossley from the other side of the courtyard. The old woman leaned out from a second-floor window, scowling down at the 4-year-old boy with wild curls and a wooden stick in his hand. But Emil didn't stop. He couldn't. Something was in there. Something was crying. It had started the night before. Emil had woken to a strange, muffled sound. At first he thought it was the wind scraping the alley gate, but it returned softer, slower, a whimper, not human, not the kind of sound you hear in city ruins. He pressed his ear to the cold stone of the old storage building in the far corner of the yard, the one no one used anymore, and heard it again. A fragile, shallow whine, the sound of something barely holding on. This morning he came back with his stick. He banged on the wall near where the noise was strongest, again and again, as if trying to tap out a signal. When no one answered, he started digging at the crumbling plaster with the tip of his stick. He didn't know why. He just knew something was trapped out behind him. The complex was still waking up. Broken windows rattled in the breeze. The landlord's mutt barked on the roof. Laundry lines swayed above like tangled flags. No one paid attention to Emil. No one ever did. His mother worked night shifts at the chemical plant and slept through the day. His father, well, there hadn't been one for a long time. He scraped until his hand stung, and then, beneath a loose slab of chipped concrete, he saw at first just fur, matted and pale, then a nose, and finally, one eye, a dog, or what was left of one. The animal was wedged between layers of broken stone and cinder block, as if someone had tried to seal it in alive. Only its head stuck out, barely moving, breath rattling through cracked lips. It didn't bark, it didn't flinch, it just looked at Emil with a kind of quiet, unspeakable pain. The boy froze. His stick fell from his hand. He ran not out of fear but because he needed help. But help, in places like these, didn't come easy. When he reached his apartment and pulled on his mother's sleeve, she stirred in her sleep, groggy and exhausted. "Dog in the wall," he whispered urgently. She waved him off. "Not now, baby. Go play." He tugged harder. "He's crying." She didn't open her eyes, though. Emil went to the next door, knocked, then the next. He tried everyone. Most ignored him, some laughed. One man cursed and slammed the door in his face. In a place filled with people, Emil had never felt more alone, so he went back. Alone, the dog hadn't moved, but its eye followed him. He sat down in the dirt beside the wall and began talking to it, telling it about his toy cars, his broken scooter, the picture he drew at daycare that nobody put on the fridge. The dog listened. Somehow it listened. That hours passed. Eventually, the sun shifted. Shadows moved. A teenage girl named Lita from the 3rd floor spotted Emil still sitting there. She climbed down the fire escape and walked over, annoyed at first, but then she saw the dog. Her breath caught in her throat. "Holy, who would do this?" she whispered. She ran back upstairs and returned with her phone, calling the local shelter. They said they'd send someone as soon as possible. That meant maybe in a few hours. Maybe never. Water. Poured it into her cupped hands and let it drip into the dog's mouth. Emil helped, holding the bottle like it was treasure. Neighbors began to gather. Not many, just a few, whispering, pointing. One man offered a hammer. Another brought a flashlight. For the first time in years, something pulled them together. When the rescue team finally arrived just before sunset, Emil refused to leave. He stood there, arms crossed, dirt on his face, staring at the men like he was the dog's guardian. And when they began to gently break away the wall, Emil reached through the dust and placed his tiny hand on the dog's muzzle. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not alone now." The dog's eyes closed slowly, not from weakness but from peace. No one understood how it had survived. The vet said it must have been trapped for days, maybe longer. Malnourished, dehydrated, injured, but alive. They found an old rusted collar around its neck. No tags, no chip, no name. But Emil gave it one. "Bruno," he said firmly, "because he looks brave." No one argued. As the rescue van pulled away, the entire courtyard watched in silence. And as the doors closed, the dog raised his head weakly, eyes locking with the boy one last time. That night, as Emil finally fell asleep on the couch, clutching a torn sock Bruno had been chewing on, he dreamed not of noise or hunger or darkness but of a field, wide open, full of sun, and a dog running toward him, no longer broken. Because sometimes it doesn't take a grown-up to save a life. Just a child who refuses to walk away from a wall that shouldn't be silent. Bruno stayed in critical care for 3 days. The shelter clinic had done all they could: fluid therapy, slow feed recovery, wound treatment, but they weren't sure he'd make it through the first night. His body was a roadmap of neglect. Cracked paws, scar tissue along his ribs, a gash across his side that looked old but poorly healed. The vet said it was a miracle he survived at all, let alone with the will to stay alert. But Emil never had any doubt. He visited every day, sitting quietly beside the glass, watching the dog's chest rise and fall with mechanical rhythm. Sometimes, he'd hum songs only toddlers know. Other times, he'd whisper secrets. He didn't talk to adults much, not about this, because Bruno wasn't a news story to him. He was a friend. The shelter staff grew fond of Emil quickly. They let him help pour water into bowls or fold towels near Bruno's kennel. He wasn't allowed inside. But that didn't stop him from crouching down and sliding his hand through the bars when no one was watching, just to touch the dog's fur. On the fourth morning when Emil came in, he found something different. The kennel door was open, and Bruno wasn't on the floor. He was sitting upright, still gaunt, still weak, but eyes bright. When he saw the boy, he stood on trembling legs and wagged his tail for the first time. The shelter staff gathered around. One of the volunteers, a kind woman named Janie, said quietly, "He hasn't done that for anyone else." She glanced at the others. Not once. The moment was small, easy to miss, but something shifted after that. A reporter had picked up the story from a community tip and posted about it online. Boy finds dog trapped in wall, miracle rescue in abandoned yard. Within hours it spread. People donated, some offered to adopt. Animal rights groups launched investigations. News vans showed up outside the building. Emil didn't understand most of it. All he knew was that Bruno was being talked about by strangers who didn't know what it was like to kneel beside a wall and listen to suffering alone. The shelter began receiving calls, people wanting to help, others wanting credit. One man claimed to have owned Bruno before he ran away. Another said the dog was part of an old construction site security team and had probably gotten stuck chasing something. The most disturbing call came from a blocked number, where a voice sharp and angry said, "You should have left him there. That dog doesn't belong to anyone." They never found out who it was. A week after the rescue, Bruno was cleared for temporary foster care. He still needed medication, soft food, and quiet rest, but his vitals had stabilized. The shelter offered to place him in a licensed foster home until a permanent family could be found. Emil's mother, Anna, was hesitant. Her life was already tight, small apartment, long hours, no backup. But when she picked Emil up from the shelter that evening, and he said, "He doesn't like anywhere but near me," something in her cracked. She agreed. Bruno came home. At first, it wasn't easy. He limped often. He flinched at loud sounds. He hated being alone and cried quietly in his sleep. Anna had to rearrange furniture, place blankets in corners, and keep a fan running at night just to soothe him. But Emil understood him in a way no one else could. The boy never shouted, never tugged. He'd just sit near him for hours, reading picture books, holding a toy up to Bruno's nose, or lying down beside him until the dog's breath slowed. Day by day, Bruno changed. His tail wagged more often. He followed Emil around like a shadow. He even barked once, startling everyone, including himself. But just when things began to feel safe, everything turned. 2 weeks after Bruno moved in, a man showed up at the building. He drove a black pickup, wore mirrored sunglasses, and carried paperwork. He claimed ownership of Bruno, said he'd filed a missing pet report last year, and had photos of Bruno as a puppy to prove it. He was accompanied by a lawyer, and he wasn't alone. Two uniformed officers stood behind him, awkward but official, Anna argued. The shelter staff protested. But the man's documents were technically in order, and when the lawyer threatened a civil case, everything stalled. Legally, the city had to release the dog for examination until ownership was verified. They took Bruno that same afternoon. Emil screamed. He kicked, he begged, but no one listened. Bruno was loaded into the truck in a carrier too small for him. His head turned as the door closed, eyes wide with confusion. Emil ran after the vehicle until his legs gave out, collapsing in the dust as the taillights disappeared down the street. That night, Anna held him as he cried himself to sleep. The boy's small hands clenched a drawing he'd made just days earlier, him and Bruno in the park, sharing ice cream. The crayon dog looked happy. Now it was just paper. But the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, a woman from the shelter arrived at their door. She handed Anna a USB drive and a sealed envelope. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered. Inside was surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped, undeniable. It showed the man from the truck, not last week but months earlier, in that same abandoned courtyard, near that wall, holding a brick and dragging a dog by the collar. The footage lasted only 43 seconds, but it was enough. Anna stared at it in silence. Then she picked up the phone. Emil sat on the floor beside the coffee table, unaware of the storm about to unfold. But he looked up at the screen, saw that flicker of movement, the man, the brick, the leash, and he whispered, barely audible, "I knew it." And in that moment, everything changed. Again. By morning, the footage was in the hands of the shelter director, the local police department, and thanks to a teenager named Lita who had helped Emil that first day, a city councilwoman who had taken a particular interest in the story. What had started as a quiet act of compassion by a child was now about to become a legal storm. And Emil, barely old enough to write his full name, stood in the middle of it all, waiting for the one thing that mattered to him. Bruno. The footage left little room for doubt. It showed the man later confirmed as Victor Brown, a struggling German shepherd, through the weeds behind the storage building. Bruno looked thinner then, but the markings were unmistakable. Bramley shoved him against the wall, pressed the dog's body between two crumbling panels of cement, and began sealing the space with brick and mortar. No emotion, no hesitation. It was mechanical, routine. He paused once, looking around, then walked away. When detectives reviewed the audio-laced footage from the neighboring security system, they heard one more damning detail: the whimper. That same sound Emil had followed in the first place. It was enough. Within 24 hours, officers arrived at Bramley's property with a warrant. They found Bruno locked in a backyard kennel, dehydrated and shivering, surrounded by overturned bowls and dry patches of grass. There was no shade, no shelter. When they opened the gates, Bruno didn't run, he didn't bark. He only looked past them, as if searching for someone who hadn't come. The shelter took custody immediately. Bruno was checked, cleaned, and placed under medical observation again. He had lost 2 pounds in barely a week. But this time, something in his demeanor was different, dull, detached, as if trust had fractured somewhere deeper than the body. Emil wasn't allowed to visit, not yet. Legal proceedings were in motion. Ownership had to be determined officially now. Bramley's claim was revoked pending criminal charges, but Bruno was still considered evidence. Just another form to file. Just another living thing stuck in a cage. But Emil didn't care about the paperwork. He just knew something was wrong. One night Anna found him sitting by the window, whispering into his cupped hands. "What are you doing, baby?" she asked gently. "I think he forgot I'm coming," Emil said without turning. "He thinks I left him," and his chest tightened. There was nothing she could say, nothing that could make a child understand how slow the justice system moved, how it stalled, how it sometimes forgot the very people it was supposed to protect. But someone else was listening. Lita posted the footage to social media that night, along with a timeline of events and a hashtag Bring Bruno Home. Within hours, the post exploded. National outlets picked up the story. Animal rights organizations began applying pressure, and strangers, tens of thousands of them, shared email. Photo beside Bruno's, the caption simply read, "He didn't hear a wall, he heard a heartbeat." The public response couldn't be ignored. That Friday, INA received a call from the mayor's office. A hearing had been expedited. The court would meet Monday morning to decide the final placement of Bruno and Emil. Because of how everything began, would be allowed to speak. Anna didn't know whether to cry or panic, but Emil, he just nodded. "I'll tell them the truth," he said, as if that was all it would take. When Monday came, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row. Shelter staff, volunteers, officers, lawyers, but at the center of it all sat a little boy with dust on his shoes and worry in his eyes, gripping a crumpled drawing of a dog with a crooked tail and a hero's smile when they called his name. Emil walked to the front, his legs stiff with nerves. The judge, an older man with a tired but kind face, leaned forward. "Do you have something you'd like to say, son?" Emil unfolded his paper, then stopped. He looked around the room, then at the judge, and finally said, "I don't want to read this, I just want to talk." The courtroom went silent. "I think Bruno was broken when I found him," Emil began. "Not his legs or his skin. Inside, like he thought no one cared. He was quiet, not like a sick dog, but like someone who tried yelling a long time ago and gave up." He looked down at his hands, then back up. "I didn't save him. I just listened, that's all. He wasn't barking, he was crying. And when I touched him, he didn't bite me. He just leaned in like he'd been waiting." A tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it. "Bruno's not a thing. He's not something you file or forget. He remembers being hurt, but he also remembers love. He just needs someone to show him that love wasn't a mistake." He looked directly at the judge. "I want to be that someone." No one breathed, not even the reporters. The judge cleared his throat. He looked down at his notes, then back at Emil, and in a voice laced with something rare emotion, he spoke. "I believe that's the most honest testimony this court has heard all year." Within the hour, Bruno was released into the custody of Anna Matthias and her son. When Emil walked into the recovery room that afternoon, Bruno didn't move at first. His head was down, his eyes unfocused. But the moment Emil called his name, softly, just once, Bruno stood. He limped toward the boy, tail uncertain, eyes flickering with disbelief. And when Emil dropped to his knees and opened his arms, Bruno collapsed into him with a sound that wasn't quite a whimper but something close to relief. Everyone in the room cried, and later that night, as the sun set behind the city and the world moved on to its next story, Emil sat on the floor of his tiny apartment with his head on Bruno's chest, and this time there were no walls between them. Winter came early that year. Cold winds rolled in through the alleyways of Emil's neighborhood, scattering leaves across the same courtyard where everything had begun. The wall where Bruno had once been entombed was now gone, reduced to rubble and cleared out by volunteers. In its place stood a small wooden bench with a plaque etched in bronze. It read, "Not all scars are meant to be hidden. Some are meant to be signs so we never forget." Bruno had been home for nearly 2 months now, home in every way that mattered. Anna had made peace with the chaos piles of chewed socks, water bowls that always seemed to spill at night, muddy paw prints on the carpet. But she said nothing. Every time she looked at Emil sleeping with Bruno curled at his feet, her heart softened. Something had changed in her son since the rescue. He was still quiet, still thoughtful, but there was a glow in him now, like the fire of someone who had once heard something no one else could, and answered without hesitation. The world hadn't let the story die either. An independent journalist had picked up the footage in Emo's courtroom testimony, and it had since become the subject of a short documentary. Schools showed it in assemblies. Animal welfare groups used it in training seminars. People stopped Emil on the street now, not with the awe reserved for viral fame, but with genuine warmth. He had become a symbol of something rare, undiluted kindness. But not everyone had forgotten the man who tried to destroy Bruno. Victor Bramley was facing multiple charges: animal cruelty, falsification of documents, obstruction. Yet he had posted bail and disappeared from public view, awaiting trial. The legal process was slow, too slow, and in the meantime something darker began to stir. It started subtly. Emil's school received a call from someone asking what time his classes ended. Days later, Anna's mailbox was found open with its contents scattered on the street. Once Anna thought she saw a black pickup idling across the courtyard at night, but when she stepped outside it was gone. She didn't tell Emil, she didn't want to scare him, but the feeling lingered. Then, one afternoon, while Emil and Bruno were walking the perimeter of the courtyard like they did every day, Bruno froze. His body went rigid, nose pointed toward the alley. He let out a low growl, not loud but deep, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Emil followed his gaze and saw a shadow duck out of sight. Bruno lunged forward, but Emil held tight to the leash. When they reached the alley wall, nothing was there. But the boy didn't feel safe. That night, Anna made a decision. She called Marta, the woman who had helped during the early investigation, and asked for guidance. Marta connected her with a private security firm that specialized in witness protection, particularly in sensitive cruelty cases. Within a week, cameras were installed outside their apartment. Motion lights, reinforced locks. Still, Anna worried. Not just about safety, but about Emil's spirit. He had started waking in the middle of the night again, not crying, just sitting in bed, holding Bruno's collar, listening. "He's afraid we'll forget again," Emil said once, like before. Anna knelt by his bed, brushing hair from his eyes. "No one's forgetting this time, baby, not ever again." But deep down, Emil knew what she didn't say. Some people forget on purpose. A week before Christmas, something unexpected arrived. A thick envelope, hand-delivered, marked with no return address. Inside was a printed letter and a key. The letter was written in tight, formal handwriting. It read, "To the child who heard what none of us could, you reminded me why I built this place in the first place. It used to be a shelter for dogs no one wanted. Then bureaucracy took over, and I lost sight of what mattered. I watched your story. I watched that courtroom moment, and I saw something that doesn't happen anymore, someone choosing to care when they didn't have to. I'm retiring. I've transferred ownership of the old shelter property to your mother's name. I know that's complicated, but enclosed is a key. If you ever want to rebuild what was lost, you'll have everything you need." It was unsigned. Anna was stunned, but Emil wasn't. He smiled quietly. "I think he heard Bruno too," he said. In the weeks that followed, Anna worked with lawyers to verify the property. It was legitimate. An old red brick building on the edge of the city, abandoned for years, fenced in, vandalized, forgotten. But Emil didn't see rust or peeling paint. He saw rooms full of warmth, a yard for running, a place where no one would be left behind again. They called it Bruno's house. It didn't open right away. It took months, donations, volunteers, help from strangers who still remembered the story. But the day the new sign was nailed above the door, Bruno stood beneath it, tail wagging, now older but stronger than he had ever been. On opening day, children lined up to meet the dog from the wall. Emil sat beside him, handing out stickers and small treats to every visitor. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, a group of former strays barked happily in the yard, free and unafraid. Someone asked Emil what made him stop that day, what made him dig at that wall when no one else cared. He looked at the crowd and said, softly, "Because I heard someone asking not to be forgotten." And he never forgot. Neither did the world. Bruno passed away 5 years later, on a quiet morning in March, with the scent of spring just beginning to move through the cracked sidewalks of Emil's neighborhood. The vet said his heart had simply given out. No suffering, no struggle, just a peaceful closing of a long, extraordinary chapter. Emil was 13 by then. He didn't cry the way he had when Bruno was taken years earlier. He sat beside him, one hand resting on the old shepherd's chest, and whispered the same words he'd whispered that day in the courtyard. "You're not alone now." The whole city seemed to mourn with him by then. Bruno's house wasn't just a shelter, it was a sanctuary, not just for animals but for people, too. Children from unstable homes volunteered after school. Elderly neighbors came to sit in the garden with the dogs, sharing stories of their own forgotten pets. Veterans who had long stopped speaking in group therapy found their voices again while brushing down nervous rescues. The place had grown slowly and stubbornly into something no law or fund ever could have planned, a living memory of what it meant to listen when the world tells you not to. And at the heart of it all had always been Emil and Bruno. Even after Bruno's health began to fade, he never stopped showing up. He'd limp across the center each morning, settling near the lobby door, as if silently welcoming each new soul with the kind of grace only time and suffering can teach. He didn't need to bark, he didn't need to do anything. His presence was the lesson. The day of his passing, Emil organized a memorial beneath a tree in the courtyard where it had all begun, the same place where the wall once stood, where a 4-year-old boy had heard something no one else did. People came from everywhere: old volunteers, rescued families, reporters, strangers who had followed the story and somehow felt part of it. Even the mayor attended quietly in the back row. But the most striking guests were the dogs, more than 2 dozen of them, once broken, now healed, tails wagging, noses raised toward the sky as if they understood that the one who had shown them the way was no longer here. Among them were Bruno's sons and daughters, rescues Emil had fostered and rehabilitated with the same compassion that had once guided his own small hands. When Emil finally stepped forward to speak, he didn't carry a script. He didn't need one. Bruno never learned words. He began, voice steady. But he understood silence better than anyone. He knew when someone was hurting. He knew when someone was alone, and he never turned away, not once. He paused, glancing toward the bench where Bruno had often laid. "I've thought a lot about that wall," he said. "About how someone could trap a living thing inside it and walk away like it was nothing. And for a long time I thought the story was about breaking that wall down, about freeing what was trapped." He looked up, eyes brighter than the sky behind him. "But now I know it wasn't just about breaking a wall. It was about building something better in its place. A world where no one has to beg to be heard, where no child has to dig for proof that kindness exists." He stepped back, emotion brimming but unshaken, and the crowd stood with him, as if collectively remembering something they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the sky began to turn a deep, soft violet, Emil remained at the tree alone. The wind carried faint sounds from the shelter: laughter, paws skimming tile, the shuffle of crates, life continuing. Just as Bruno would have wanted. He opened his backpack and pulled out a tin box, small, scratched, filled with keepsakes. Bruno's first collar. A photo of them curled together under a blanket. The crayon drawing from that first night, faded now but still legible. And at the very bottom, the rusted tag they had found buried near the collapsed wall during the first week of rebuilding. The one that had no name on it, only numbers. Evidence, someone had once said. A remnant of ownership. But Emil had never believed that. He held the tag tightly, then buried it beneath the bench, pressing it into the soil with both hands, not as a symbol of pain, but as proof that someone once tried to silence a heartbeat and failed. Because Bruno wasn't just saved, he lived, fully, lovingly, loudly, in his own quiet way. And in doing so, he taught a boy how to see the world, not as it is, but as it could be if we just stopped, listened, and answered. That night, Emil sat on the shelter's roof, looking out over the lights of the city, and for a moment, he swore he heard it again: not a cry, not a bark, just breathing, steady, safe, and in that breath lived the memory of a dog who had once been sealed away from the world, only to become the reason it changed. The wall was gone, but what it left behind would never fade.